Hi, this is Pastor Joe Green, head pastor of Antioch Assembly Church located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, also the founder of the 2019 movement, and I want to share a couple of thoughts with you. Recently there was an accusation made against President Trump that says that by LeBron James, saying that he has made sports divisive. And of course, this is the old bait and switch. One of the rules for radicals strategies that Saul Alinsky came up with in his book Rules for Radicals was that you accuse the other side of doing what you're doing. And so people like LeBron James, some of the professional athletes now, whether it's sports teams or whether it's individuals, they are the ones that's using sports to separate and divide us as a nation. Many of these teams that, because they disagree politically with President Trump, they have even turned down invitations to go to the White House. This whole taking a knee at the NFL games. And now LeBron James, who's going on a kind of a campaign against President Trump and has been for some time. And so they're getting in a back and forth. And of course, they're doing the old throw the rock and hide the hand strategy. And what that means is somebody throws a rock and then they hide their hand. And then when somebody comes looking to see who threw the rock, they act like they don't know what happened. So that's what's happening. People are attacking the president, and when he attacks back, whether you like how he attacks back or, defends himself is a different issue. But the fact of the matter is when you attack and attack and attack, and then he comes back at people, and then they act like, look at him, he's a big bully, he's trying to pick on us. But here's what what I want to get to is that they're using sports to divide us. And they're using a tactic which has become very popular, especially with people of color, which is victimization or victimology. And I'm going to give you the definition, but what do I mean by that? Because first and foremost, NFL players as a whole, professional athletes, are not victims. This whole victim mentality, or they're acting like, first of all, they're not on the same level as the average, everyday, ordinary citizen, whether they're black, white, or whatever. They're just not. Secondly, they're definitely not on the same level as the average person living in the inner city, black or Hispanic person living in the inner city. They have very little reference to the frame of reference. I read a statistic. I think that the minimum wage of a NFL player may be like $300,000, and I'm just using that for example. But the average salary for all NFL players is over a couple of $1 million. So they make over, and that's a year. So $2 million a year. The NBA is probably a little bit higher. But you have some of these, Colin Kaepernick in particular, he had signed a contract. His last contract he signed with the San Francisco 49ers was overall worth over $100 million. And so this whole idea that, hey, I'm with you, I'm relating with you, I'm one of you, is just not true. They're not victims. And what happens is they send the wrong message, because you have the average person that comes, most of the people that come to an NFL game to see the game, 80% of the people are white males. And 70% of the players in the NFL are African-American males. And so these, and you think about the average salary for a person in America, the average yearly income is about between 38 and I think it's $45,000 a year. So if the average person makes $38,000 to $45,000 a year, they're going to see these athletes who average $2 million a year in income to play a game. I'm not belittling the fact that they should get paid money, because people pay to go see them. But they're playing a game. They're playing football or basketball. They're not, healing, cancer. They're not pulling little kids out of a building. Not to say that they can't do that, but that's not what they're getting paid for. So this whole idea that they are victims is not real. It's not a real thing, but they are putting themselves as victims. The other thing I want to say, and then I'm going to get into the talk, is that one of the things that happens traditionally is you have people like Colin Kaepernick, who's taking a knee, and he said that he was doing it to protest police brutality and injustice, racial injustice in America. So those are very vague terms, and the problem with that is that not only is he giving a very vague term, racial injustice in America is such a vague term, you can never solve that. You can't solve that because it's such a vague term. You have to be more specific when defining a problem in order to get a solution. So there's never going to be a solution because there's always going to be people that feel like they're not treated fairly, always. The other part of that is if I was protesting police brutality, then I should go to the police station or the city hall in the town that I'm protesting. So for instance, if I was protesting police brutality in Baltimore, I should go to the police chief of Baltimore or to the mayor of Baltimore, because those are the people that have the power to exact change in the area that I'm protesting. It doesn't make sense for me to protest on Sunday morning at the football game, something that happens. If I really wanted action, I could go directly to the source as an NFL player. I promise you that if Colin Kaepernick went to the police chief of a major city or the mayor of the city and wanted to have an open forum, he has the audience to do so. He has the influence to do so. He can have a press conference and have the police chief, invite the police chief to come and say, we want to come up with a solution to this problem. So that's how you go about actually getting change, not by having some abstract issue that you're fussing with. And the problem with that is that when people that are saying, yeah, I'm standing with Colin Kaepernick, I'm taking a knee, and all these other things that they say, when they say that, and then nothing ever changes, it discourages people. So now people are saying, see, we told you nothing ever changes. So I'm not even going to bother with protesting, or I'm not even going to bother with bringing up issues because nothing ever changes. And so that's one of the strategies of the enemy to keep people discouraged and to also distract people. So if we do have a real problem that we say police brutality is a problem, instead of going to the source, we are actually having this abstract protest that will never solve anything, because the NFL owners aren't the ones that are brutalizing minorities. They're not the ones that are shooting black kids in the streets. So you're hurting their bottom line by affecting their product, which is the Sunday games, and nothing ever gets changed. But anyway, this is all part of what's called victimology, and victimology is defined as the possession of an outlook arising from real or imagined victimization that seems to glorify and indulge the state of being a victim. And so there's this perpetual state of victimhood that is perpetrated among minorities and other groups. And so again, when you have the LeBron James who's acting as though, somehow or another he can relate to the average person. He had this school that he opened and it was a big, he got a lot of press because of it in Akron, Ohio. But it comes out that he's not even paying for the school. It's mainly taxpayer funded. So what they do is the powers that be have traditionally raised up what they call messianic figures out of the black community, and they're the ones who are controlling the narrative, and so nothing ever changes. It's not grassroots, it's not real, and it really isn't affecting any type of change on the real issues that we face. But this victimology, it glorifies being a victim, but it never comes with a solution. And so the same issues we're dealing with in 2018 are similar to the issues that we dealt with in the 1950s and 60s during the civil rights movement, because the people that they're raising up as black leaders aren't really trying to affect change, and they profit off of there always being an issue. It would be like if I made money treating people with cancer, and that's how I make my living, and I make a lot of money, then it wouldn't be in my best interest to find a cure for cancer, because the money is in the money is in treating the people, not healing the people. Because if you heal the people, then it's over and done with. But if you don't heal the people, if you never offer the solution or the cure for cancer, then I can continually keep you in a place where you always have to come back to me. And that's what these race card baiters do for the most part, that they always have to have an issue because they'll lose relevance if they don't. So that's what victimization is. Now I'm going to go to the Bible and talk about where that originates from. In the Bible, the core of victimology is the orphan spirit that was adopted in the Garden of Eden. The first manifestation of the spirit is when Adam disobeyed God in Genesis 3, and when questioned, Adam's response was, "It was the woman you gave me." So there was a lack of accountability. He wanted to shift the blame, and he never took accountability for his part or his actions. The greatest tool of victimology is the spirit of offense. The greatest tool of victimology is the spirit of offense. Satan, of course, the adversary, the serpent, the devil, whatever you want to call him, He uses separation and division in order to promote victimology. He creates classifications of people, attaches an identity to them, and then uses it as in an adversarial manner. So what he does is he separates people based on identifiers, he in classifications, and then he always puts people in an adversarial manner. So some of the divisions he uses, of course, we know about blacks versus whites, women versus men, gays versus straight people, Americans versus foreigners, or children versus parents. This children versus parents one is very subtle, and many of you may not be aware of it. But there was a doctor, a famous pediatrician in the 50s and the 60s by the name of Dr. Spock. And what he did, he came up with this concept of correcting that correcting children and constructive criticism can hurt a child's self-esteem. So he basically told parents that it wasn't good to spank your children. He told them that it's not good to say no when you can. That this philosophy came up with this idea that they had sporting events where everybody got a participation trophy. So if it was 10 people in a race, then nobody got number one or number two. They all got a participation trophy, because they believe that if you gave somebody number one and someone came in last place, then it could hurt their self-esteem and ruin them emotionally. They even had schools in California and other places where they didn't even have grades. That's a form of socialism and communism, and what it does is it dumbs down the masses. It fights against excellence and the human spirit. The human spirit is based on competition and challenges and trying to accomplish things. So it squelches all of that. But ultimately what it did was it made it as though children were being victimized by their parents. And even to this day, they're using that strategy to tell parents that they're not allowed to impose their religious views on their children. And so, like, for instance, with gender issues, they're telling you that you shouldn't define your child's gender, that you should let your child identify their own gender. It tells people that you shouldn't define morality or sexuality in your kids. Let them explore, put options on the table. And so this is all this is all part of this victimology mindset, because what it's trying to do is trying to tell parents that when you impose your religious views on your children, that you're stifling their creativity, or you're basically making them into a victim. And we have to understand that these are all tactics of the enemy, of Satan, to separate, to divide. This whole Disney mentality where you have rebellious children that supposedly they know more than their parents. Their parents are dumb, and they tell you don't let nobody tell you how to live your life. Live your life anyway. Young people have this saying now. What's it called? Is live fast and die young, or something like that. Live fast, die young. So they're saying basically live your life to the fullest. Don't let anybody define you or confine you. Don't let anybody put rules on you. You can just live as a free spirit. And we know that that's the spirit of rebellion that the enemy stirs up inside of people. But it's based on this orphan spirit that humanity adopted in the Garden of Eden. Another tactic that the enemy uses, not only to define and separate victims into groups, but to categorize oppressor classes into groups as well. And they use trigger words to identify people into a certain oppressive class. So they use words like racist or sexist or misogynist, homophobe, xenophobe, anti-immigration. If you're pro-life, they say you're trying to violate a woman's right to choose what to do with her body. And these are trigger words that helps to stir up a victim mentality. And usually it's done to override facts and truths with emotions. So this strategy of using trigger words to classify people in victim classes, actually it ignores facts. Anytime facts come into play, they'll throw out one of these trigger words, and it's supposed to throw out the facts and attach people to an emotional response. And so even if you disagree with someone, like I know when President Obama was the president, when people politically disagreed with him or his ideologies, they would automatically put him in a class of racist. And I know that to be true because even though I'm an African American, I was writing blogs back then. And one of my blogs, I was saying how I disagreed with President Obama on moral issues like gay marriage and abortion. And so, and also his Christianity. I question his Christianity, not because I'm an expert on Christianity, but based on the statements he made. He said that there's many paths to God and there's not just one way to God. He said that his mother read from the Quran, the Bible, and all these other writings, and there's no way you could tell him that she wasn't in heaven. So just based on his profession of what he believed, I said that he wasn't a Christian, and people jumped all over me. You know, some people, because before they actually saw my profile picture, they accused me of being a racist. But the reason they were accused me of that is because I was disagreeing with him in principle. I was disagreeing. I didn't say anything about him personally or anything like that. I was disagreeing with him in principle. But because this victimology mindset with the orphan spirit attaches to something that, in order for me to disagree with him, I had to be a racist. And that was supposed to basically override the facts that I presented and the argument that I presented. And it was supposed to go right to the fact that, hey, you got to be a racist if you disagree with this. And so then that puts him in that I'm the oppressor and he was the victim in that particular situation. You know, this whole thing about xenophobia. There's people, you know, when President Trump had a Muslim ban from certain countries, they said, oh, he's xenophobic. And they also try to say that was racist, which, of course, obviously, Islam is not a race. It's a belief system. So, but again, what they would do is they call him a racist or a xenophobe. And that's one of the trigger words that they use to ignore the actual facts that there were actually people, there were terrorist groups, cells in these particular areas that they were banning people coming from. So, but that was irrelevant because facts don't matter when you're practicing victimology. Other concepts that they use, like I was born this way. Now they're saying that if you are a drug addict, that the addiction is a disease. So because addiction is a disease, we have to change how we address these people. We have to change how we deal with them. So there's no accountability, because if I consistently fall into drug addiction, then it's because I can't control it. It's a disease. You know, like sickle cell anemia is a disease. It's something that you can't, you inherit that. So they're putting it in that classification. So if sickle cell, nobody would judge me by having sickle cell because I couldn't do anything about it. I inherited. So they're saying that now a drug addiction is a disease as well. And because of that, we have to treat people differently. So I can go out and do as many drugs as I can. And my excuse can always be, well, I have a disease of addiction. So you have to be careful with these things when they use these type of trigger words, because there's always a larger strategy that they're employing. Now let's delve a little bit more in this black and white issue. Now, first and foremost, the whole concept of race was created to cause division between people. It's not a real thing, because whether it's the Bible or whatever, it's about ethnicity. It's about ethnicity and culture. It shouldn't be about race, because race is just based on skin color, and human beings are only categorized mainly 3 races. Sometimes people say 4, because there's another race they call Australoid that's supposed to be the 4th race, but primarily we look at 3 races: black, white, and Mongoloid, Negroid, and Caucasoid. So those are the 3 racial breakdowns, and they were really employed to cause division and to justify slavery. So, if you think about the Europeans that had slaves, when they transitioned slavery in America to chattel slavery, they really start to focus on race and the 1 drop rule. So if you had 1 drop of black blood, you were in the black race. Even though if you had 8 great grandparents, out of the 8 great grandparents, if one of them was black and 7 of them was white, you were still considered black. So they categorized you as a race in order to separate the races and cause division. And it wasn't really until the 16th and 19th century that they started these things. And the politicization of this field, the concept of racism, started really in the early 20th century. So at the 1865, you had the abolishment of slavery. At the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century, they had what was called the Negro dilemma. So they had to come up with strategies to basically separate people by races. So they came up with this white versus black concept. And the reason that we know that that's a true statement is because up until the early 20th century, Greeks and Italians were considered non-whites, but now they're considered white for the most part. There were other groups that weren't considered white. Jews from Europe weren't considered white back in that time. But when you separate it in race and really focus on race, then that separates Europeans, which are considered whites, from Africans, which are black. In the book called A Racial Program of the 20th Century, published in 1913, Israel Cohen of the Fabian Society He wrote, "We must realize that our party's most powerful weapon is racial tension. By propounding into consciousness of the dark races that for centuries have been oppressed by the whites, we can mold them to the program of the Communist Party in America. We will aim for subtle victory." So when you understand that the communists and the globalists, they wanted to destroy America, and one of the things that they wanted to do was fan racial unrest. And there's people that were in America that are globalists as well. Some of the former presidents were globalists, and other political leaders were actually globalists as well. So they weren't as concerned with the nation as seizing political control and ultimately ushering a form of socialism or communism where they had control of the masses. So in order for them to have control of the masses, they began to really fan the flames of racial tension in order to keep people infighting and ultimately to try to bring forth martial law. Because if there's riots in the streets like there were in Watts or various places in LA, they had riots, and so they bring in the troops. And so what their goal is to stir up racial unrest, and still the goal to this day, stir up racial unrest in a way that they can impose stiffer penalties and put more controls over the people. And so you have to understand that the real enemy isn't white versus black, it's these ruling elite class, globalist people versus the regular masses, but they use racism as a form of separation in order to control us and keep us infighting. So instead of me focusing on the actual global elite, the one percenters, if you will, and instead of me understanding that that's my real enemy, I'm more focused on the white guy down the street who has a rebel flag on his truck, and he's my enemy. Some statue in Charlottesville, that's the one I got to tear that down because that represents my biggest enemy. But we're ignoring the real strategies that the globalists are employing. We're ignoring the fact that that redneck, so to speak, with the rebel flag on his truck is going to be oppressed the same way, maybe not the same way as me, in a different way, but ultimately they don't care about him either. They're just trying to make us fight so that we don't focus on them as being the real enemy. And this whole thing with Charlottesville and this statue that's been there for 100 years, it was ridiculous. That statue wasn't killing anybody. And the same time that they're focusing on these big riots in Charlottesville or this statue, you got hundreds of people in these major cities. You had 500 or 600 people in Chicago getting killed. You got 300-400 people in Detroit getting killed. Our school systems in the inner cities are terrible. In certain inner city school districts, you only have a 30 or 40% graduation rate. But yet they want you to focus on the statue in Charlottesville, Virginia, or they want you to focus on the football player kneeling. But they're ignoring the real enemies. And so what the communists did and what the powers that be did is they said our greatest weapon is racial tension. They wrote, while inflaming the Negro minority against whites, we will instill in the whites a guilt complex for the exploitation of Negroes. We will aid the Negroes to rise to prominence in every walk of life and professions and in the world of sports and entertainment. With this prestige, the Negroes will be able to intermarry with the whites and begin a process which will deliver America to our cause. And that's from the book, A Racial Program for the 20th Century, published in 1913. And we still see the same thing happening even today. It's the same strategy that's being employed. On June 17, 1957, this passage was read into the congressional record by Representative Thomas G. Abernathy. This was a 1957 congressional record. In 1922, the Russian Comintern provided $300,000 for the spreading of communist propaganda among the Negroes. And so if you understand that the communists are part of the New World Order process, that they're trying to employ the New World Order, one of the things that they wanted to do in order to destroy America is to cause a race war. In light of all this, we see why the Supreme Court under elitist Earl Warren, elitist is another name for the global or ruling elite, issued the desegregation law in 1954, and they enforced it by using federal troops. It was created to increase tension between blacks and whites. Incidentally, it was the Warren Court who prohibited prayer and the singing Christmas carols in schools. This was intended to weaken Christianity. So the globalists understand that the biggest issues that they face was are Western culture and Christianity. So they try to erode both of those. And so Western culture is based on, we have a constitution, we have a Bill of Rights, and we have individual rights in America. They want to do away with the Western culture, the strong family system. And so they attack the family system and the family structure, the matriarchal system. All these things were enemies of their cause, and so they attacked all those things. And so racial tension is one of the tools that they use, and victimology is one of the strategies that they use in order to weaken the fabric of Western culture and Christianity and put them on the defensive. Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radicals. He is one of the most influential figures of the later part of the 20th century and the early part of the 21st century. Why do I say that? Because the liberal Democrats follow after the Saul Alinsky system. So Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, especially Hillary Clinton, she wrote her dissertation on Saul Alinsky, her college dissertation. Barack Obama was a student of Saul Alinsky because he's a radical. And actually, Barack Obama was what's known as a Fabian socialist. So I just read to you not long ago what the Fabian Society believe. Fabian socialism is a form of socialism that is derived within a democratic government. And we know ultimately socialism's end goal is communism, and communism's end goal is a new world order. And so they believe, because like I said earlier, and I said it, repeatedly, President Obama was a tool of the globalists. And because of his skin color, they knew that he would get he would lull black people to sleep, and they wouldn't fight against their strategy. And then because of victimology, you have this oppressive class of people. You have white guilt, basically. So it feeds into that as well. And I just mentioned that was part of their strategy. But here's what Saul Alinsky said. Saul Alinsky, in his book Rules for Radical, in the front cover, he says, "Lest we forget it, at least an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement to the very first radical from all of our legends, mythology, and history. And who is to know where mythology leaves off and history begins, or which is which? The first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did it so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom was Lucifer." That's a quote from Saul Alinsky. So he's giving credit to Saul Alinsky as the basically the originator or the inspiration behind his strategy for Rules for Radicals, because a radical is also a rebel. So if you think about someone who's rebellious or a radical, that's what this represents. So according to Alinsky, the organizer, in order to gain political power, he came up with the term of community organizer. And of course, we know President Obama was a community organizer in Chicago. He followed after the Saul Alinsky template, if you will. So here's what Saul Alinsky said: "Especially a paid organizer from the outside must first overcome suspicion and establish credibility. Next, the organizer must begin the task of agitating, rubbing resentments, fanning hostilities, and searching out controversy. This is necessary to get the people to participate. An organizer has to attack apathy and disturb the prevailing patterns of complacent community life where people have simply come to accept a bad situation." Alinsky would say the first step in community organization is community disorganization. So he comes in, like he said, he fans tensions. Like I said, they separate people into classes and they pit the classes against each other. But the true power source that's coming in to take over is being ignored when these things happen. There's a couple of rules for radicals. Here's rule number 5. You ridicule is the man's most potent weapon. It's hard to counterattack ridicule, and it infuriates the opposition, which then reacts to your advantage. So if you ever watch the news, especially CNN, whenever you have a liberal talking to a conservative, and especially when you have a conservative that starts using facts, the first thing that the liberal does is, "Oh, that's ridiculous. Oh, they're absurd." Like when President Trump makes statements, factual statements, regardless of if you like how he says it or not, they go, "Oh, he's crazy, he's ridiculous, he's out of his mind." That's one of the strategies of the Rules for Radicals. You ridicule the other person. You make it seem so absurd that people don't even listen. And they do it from a standpoint of matter-of-factly. So, like, we all realize that that's crazy. And unfortunately, black people especially, we have taken the bait. We have taken the bait, and we fall victim to this. So when they say something's ridiculous, we say, "Oh, it must be ridiculous because the liberals told us it is. And because they love us, it must be true." That's one of their strategies. Rule number 9, the threat is more terrifying than the thing itself. When Alinsky leaked word that the large numbers of poor people were going to tie up the washrooms at O'Hara Airport, Chicago city authorities quickly agreed to act on a long-standing commitment to a ghetto organization. They imagined the mayhem of thousands of passengers poured off airplanes to discover every washroom occupied. They then imagined that the international embarrassment and the damage of the city's reputation. And so what they did was they overreacted, because what he did was he instilled fear. And so, like with Trump, they have black people afraid that he's going to take us back to slavery and Jim Crow. I've heard people actually say that. They instill this fear and this terror in the black community that, man, this is so terrible. We got to activate now. We have to do something right now. Now, here's the ironic thing about it is when I point out to especially black people that President Obama didn't do anything for black people. He really looked out for illegal immigrants, and he looked out for LGBTQ people. He didn't do anything for black people, and the plight of black people is worse than when he came into office. So people ignore that fact. And when you bring that fact up, they say, well, he was the president's just a figurehead. He couldn't really do anything. So then if you believe that, then why are you in panic mode about Trump? Because if Trump is the president, he's just a figurehead. He can't do anything either. But of course, it's this double standard. It's this fear mongering that they say, oh, he's just a dictator. He's going to do all this. When in actuality, President Obama had, up to the time he left office, passed more executive orders than any other president in history. So that's exerting extra constitutional powers. It's not really, it's allowed in the Constitution, but not given the Constitution. You override the process which Congress is supposed to make laws. So when you give an executive order, you're actually bypassing that system. But of course, that's a fact, and facts don't matter when it comes to the radicals, the liberals, and the leftists. As Saul Alinsky says, you just ridicule the other person's point, and you use fear and threats in order to make people ignore facts. According to Alinsky, the main job of the organizer is to bait an opponent into reacting. The enemy properly goaded and guided in his reaction will be your major strength. And so that's when I say about President Trump reacts to a lot of these people. What they do is they goad him into a reaction. They consistently attack, and they criticize him, and they ridicule him, and they say all kind of nasty things to him. And then when he attacks back, they act like, oh, look, he's a bully. He's messing with us. His platform's so much bigger. That's one of the classic strategies of rules for radicals. Now, I want to give you a couple of keys. When you're dealing with the orphan spirit or the spirit of victimology, being overly nice never combats the orphan spirit. It only empowers and validates those operating in the orphan spirit. I want to say that again. If you're sometimes we get to a place where we recognize this victim mentality and we try to be overly nice to them, or we try to basically overcompensate, or we compromise our values because we feel so guilty, but it never solves the orphan spirit. It just validates and empowers those operating in that spirit. Just like LGBTQ, because they put themselves as a victim class of people that they're being victimized. And they always give you this extreme case of a gay person that got, violence perpetrated against them because they were gay, that 1 in a million time that it happened. And so now you have to pass overbearing laws to protect them because there's people out here just doing this. Black people getting shot by cops. They push this like this is a epidemic of black males getting killed by cops, when in all actuality, there's 2.5 times more non-blacks than blacks that get killed by cops. As a matter of fact, in the local news, I heard a story about a person that got killed by a cop, a white person that got shot by a cop in central Pennsylvania. And they said the person was fleeing the scene and it was a rookie cop, and that he should have used other measures. But that's not going to be on the national news, because the only time they show a person getting killed by a cop on the national news is when it's a black person, because they're fanning the flames of racial tension in America. They've separated them by classes, and they use that to manipulate the narrative and manipulate the powers the society as a whole. Because the orphan spirit is rooted in mistrust and suspicion, it can never truly be defeated by simply being nice. The only way that spirit is ever defeated is to be confronted with truth. And so you have to bring people to truth and facts. If they ignore facts, then they will never be delivered from the orphan spirit. like I said about the whole thing with black people getting shot by cops, that's an emotional thing. So on CNN, they'll show it over and over and over again, and they'll say it's happened again. Look, it's happened again. Breaking news: a black male gets shot by a cop, and so it stokes emotional response, and people saying we have to do something, we have to protest. But if they actually show the statistics and the numbers, that there's a greater possibility of a cop being shot by a black male than vice versa. Those are Department of Justice statistics. When you understand that, I think the last, and I'm just estimating, in the last 12 months, I think they said like 170 people got killed by police officers, and 7 of them were black. So 7 out of 170 is a very small percentage, but they would have you to believe that it's a huge percentage of blacks being killed by cops. And so now blacks are like, we're victimized. It's just like slavery and Jim Crow. It's just like the civil rights and back in the 60s, when in all essence, it really isn't. They're just pushing that narrative to separate and divide us. And then you have Colin Kaepernick and the other NFL players saying something has to be done about this. But it's not a real issue. I mean, it's an issue anytime anybody gets killed by cops, but it's not necessarily a racial issue. It could just be that you have a lot of untrained cops that need better training. If you look at the statistics, that should be the conclusion. The conclusion shouldn't be that all cops are racist and they're targeting black people. There may be some, but overall, that's definitely not the statistic. That's a statistic anomaly that a black person gets killed by a cop. Victimology creates a victimizer guilt, which causes the overcompensation of what is deemed as the oppressive class. It also ignores accountability and gives the victim class free rein to become the oppressor with some type of false sense of righteous revenge. This mentality ultimately traps the victim class, avoids personal responsibility, and then creates an eternal struggle between the classes that is never resolved. And so, again, this is what happens. Victimology. So you have the victim class, so whether it's blacks or gay people, Hispanics, illegal immigrants, you have them being classified as the victims, and then you have this the people that are put into a victimizer class. So white people, for instance, they say that there's white supremacy. They'll act like white males are the victimizer, or are always the victimizer, and so because of that, sometimes it puts them into a defensive mode that keeps them from, it ignores accountability. It gives the victim class a free rein to become. So now you can beat up on white people. You can criticize. You can get on television and I can condemn, I can insult, I can ridicule white people and talk about white privilege all I want. But if a white person got on there and starts criticizing black people, then it's because they're racist. If they make these racist comments, President Trump calls somebody stupid or say that they're not smart, it automatically has to be because they're racist, not because he thinks that they're stupid. I mean, it's not good to call anybody stupid, but stupidity is not, it's not a black thing or a white thing. Stupidity is, like Forrest Gump said, stupid is as stupid does. So if you think somebody's stupid, it doesn't have to be because of their race. It's just that you disagree with the person's position. Now, what does the Bible say? I'm going to leave you with these last 2 scriptures. When we talk about the victim class, whether it's black, white, LGBT, or whatever the case may be, even if you believe that you are like a drug addict, that you have a disease, or even if you believe that you were born with homosexual tendencies or pedophilia or whatever the case may be, here's what the Bible says about it. 1 Corinthians 6 verse 9 says, or do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who practice homosexuality, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. And such were some of you, but you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of our God. So it says, even if you were born that way, you've been born again by the Spirit of God. And so that sin no longer reigns in your body. You have the victory over that. Instead of a victim, you become a victor. Romans chapter 8, beginning with verse 15, it says, for you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him in order that we may also be glorified with him. And so it's saying here that instead of walking around with that orphan spirit, that victim spirit, that we have the spirit of adoption in Christ Jesus from every race, every tribe, and every tongue. Every sin that so easily besets you, you can be delivered from. You can have the victory over it if you trust in God. And so this has been Dr. Joe Green, and I thank you for this time. Please subscribe to my channel, my YouTube channel, my Patreon. Also consider supporting the ministry, because we have a lot of information to get out there, and we want to get this out to all the rest of the world so we all can be free and we can all be united in the truth of God's word. Be blessed of the Lord. Shalom.